Yay, and welcome to another hip hop albums ranking. This is going to be another long video, I believe, because we're looking at 10 albums from Ice Cube. So, Mr. Cube has been around for since the late 80s with NWA, Dr. Dre, and Eazy-E. Has since the 90s been able to cultivate a solo career for himself, as well as meshing together a music and movie career. Is certainly a rapper who's taken over Hollywood very successfully, whilst being able to maintain a very prolific music career, as seen by the amount of albums that we're looking at. And so we can go from 10 to 1. Looking at number 10, we go later on in the career. We have 2010's I Am the West, which from the title is a way to try and re-establish West Coast in hip hop in his own style as well, which perhaps some of his older projects, for the ones leading up to this one, weren't quite as heavy with a West Coast feel as this one. And he does bring a lot of the traditional West Coast style on the album, mixing up with older West Coast producers like one of his regulars, Sir Jinx, bringing in newer producers, DJ Monte, T-Mix. And at a time where there wasn't really a lot of major West Coast artists in hip hop, particularly compared to when Ice Cube was first around, Game and Snoop Dogg weren't quite as prolific as they had been. Kendrick Lamar hadn't broken through yet. So it's understandable that Ice Cube would want to try and break through and rep that West, as he does on the lead single, I Rep That West. A banging lead single where he not only talks about California but the entirety of the western states of America, not just as a West Coast artist but as a veteran artist as well, as seen on the track No Country for Young Men. We have some of Ice Cube's more political sounding tracks towards the end of the album, with Hood Robin, Your Money or Your Life, Fat Cat closing off the album. So these songs looking at the greed of corporation and big businesses. Other than these tracks, there's not a lot else that's particularly strong on the album. A lot of it just comes across quite generic, clubby street songs. Be it the trappy sort of repetitive flow of It Is What It Is, the appearances from Ice Cube's sons, which are nice to for him to give them the platform. She couldn't make on her own. A track about a pimp isn't necessarily the way I'd want to introduce my children to hip hop, but there you go. There's a softer track towards the end, Nothing Like LA, more of a song for his lady. But again, a lot of the songs, apart from the standout tracks, are just quite plain and repetitive. So they're certainly not as strong as the standout tracks on the album. So it's why I feel kind of, while it does bring back more of the West Coast style, it's not necessarily the best representation of it, and it's why I feel this one is the bottom of the pile. Sort of similarly, number 9, 2000's War and Peace Volume 2, the Peace disc. A fairly lengthy project, which kind of gives way to quite a bit of filler. There are some standout singles on the album. Hello, a reunion with Dr. Dre and MC Ren of NWA, Until We Rich, with Crazy Bone of Bone Thugs and Harmony on the chorus. The infectious club banger, You Can Do It, with Miss Toya and Mac 10. There are a couple of other high points. record company pimping, looking at the records industry. Apart from that, there's a lot of other just kind of middling club tracks. You Ain't Got a Lie to Kick It with with Chris Rock. Helping out with the chorus kind of livens it up a little bit, but apart from these appearances, say there's a lot of the other songs just kind of become a bit forgettable and don't stand up to the higher tracks on the album. So yeah, I mean, with some editing, maybe this album could have been a bit better. And I guess it's supposed to be the more commercial, poppy sort of style, with being the peace disc as opposed to the war disc, which we'll get on to later. But for the most part, it doesn't quite hit so well. All the tracks are fine, but I say not a lot of them are particularly memorable. You can't take much away from them. And this is where we get into, with a lot of Ice Cube's discography, is the divide between the more political, substantial albums and the commercial albums. And this is definitely an example of the latter case, not working so well. So that's all you can say about it, really. Number 8. I have Laugh Now, Cry Later. Suffers from a similar problem in the sense of it being quite a long commercial album. But, the commercial songs are, they all bang fairly well, with production from Scott Storch, Lil Jon, Swiss Beats, certainly making the tracks very lively. There are a lot of hidden political lyrics on the album as well, which kind of helps bring the album up a bit. Collaborations with Lil Jon, as I say, and Snoop Dogg appearing a couple of times. A lot of the album, though, is Ice Cube on his own, which is quite useful to hear Ice Cube's voice throughout the majority of the album, not being taken over by any guest features particularly, as some of the other albums have done. And looking at subjects such as snitching was always very popular in hip hop, with the track "Stop Snitching." A history of violence growing up. There are certainly songs "Why We Thugs," which, while it comes across as more of a street banger, does actually look a lot at the thug nature of artists and just why their environment brings them up to be thugs. So from that aspect, while it is quite a long commercial project, it does have these glimmers of Ice Cube with something to say as well. So that helps take it up a bit further than some of the other ones we've just been over. Then I get the middle kind of gets a little bit tricky at this point. I think so. It's number 7 now, which is 1993's Lethal Injection, and so this was kind of like the last of the first initial run of Ice Cube albums. After this, he slowed down a little bit to kind of go more into film work and working with West Side Connection. And it kept along a lot of the same themes of his older work, looking at race and the police and West Coast California, the relationship between the streets and the police. Songs like Ghetto Bird, looking at the police helicopter chases through the hoods of California. Little SG, which looks at younger people becoming the gangster thug characters. And What Can I Do as well, which similarly which has several remixes as well, which all kind of look at the same sort of thing. There's some more more of a G-funk influence on this album, particularly with One Nation and Bob Gunn with George Clinton. It tries to go for a bit of an epic, funkadelic Parliament feel, making it a very long track, which it perhaps didn't necessarily need to be, but it still works as a very funky track. There are certainly songs which don't hit quite as well in terms of subject and content. Cave Bitch springs to mind, where you understand what Ice Cube is trying to look at, but perhaps didn't go for it in quite the correct way. There are certainly moments where it feels like Ice Cube is trying to be too much the aggressor rather than actually dealing with particular issues. And again, this was the fourth album in a kind of series of reasonably similar thematic albums, so the content did kind of tire a little bit and wasn't quite as strong as some of the older ones, which is why this one isn't quite as memorable, I feel, as the albums that preceded it. So that's why we're having that one there. Number 6 we're on now, I believe, aren't we? Yeah, so I think I have to go to my phone with this. This was the recent Everything's Corrupt, released right at the end of 2018, after a bit of a break from I Am the West. So after 8 years and a lot of delays, we finally got this album, and it was more of a return to the more political style Ice Cube, with some mixture of some club bangers on there, the funky new funkadelic, appearing with Too Short on the album. A lot of the tracks, it feels Ice Cube's looking at drugs or the pharmaceutical company business, which he is, at least it's kind of sees him tackling things from a different standpoint, looking at different issues with America. Not all of them. After a while, it may feel like looking at the same thing, kind of beating a dead horse. But generally, it works fairly well. There's Arrest the President, a look at the now former President of the United States. I can say that. I had to wait for that to kind of sink in really before I could do this one. Donald Trump, which is kind of an ironic song now, given... well, look, this is... Okay, so Ice Cube was supposed to be part of the helping make the Platinum Plan with Donald Trump to help give back to black communities, which, is fine. And I appreciate Ice Cube wanting to willingness to work with anyone to try and deliver to black communities. There's certainly the issue of whether Trump would have actually delivered on this project. And certainly it feels very bizarre after, attacking him on this album, Arrest the President. But it still, works as a strong anti-authority song. Similarly, Good Cop, Bad Cop, again, looks at the police, but from a bit of a different standpoint this time, looking at the goods in cops, as opposed to just looking at cops as a whole being bad, and while we have the issues of systemic racism in police industries, both here in the States and worldwide, generally speaking, it is nice for Ice Cube to have an explanation of the fact that not all police are necessarily bad, not all police are corrupt, and there are certainly good cops in there that maybe get overshadowed by the bad cops. And this was also a track that was placed on the re-release, the 25th anniversary re-release of Death Certificate, which again we'll get onto later and discuss fully. But yeah, so as a way of returning to the more political side of Ice Cube, as a whole, the project is fairly cohesive, works well. There's a lot of the West Coast banger style on it. There's a generally nice strong return to form album. Number 5, we have The Predator. So again, this was 1992, end of 1992. This was after the LA riots, after the Rodney King trial. So a lot of the album reflects that. There's a lot of discussion about these events, about the effects that they had on black people in Los Angeles at that time. Tracks like Who Got the Camera, When They're Gonna Shoot, looking at how about the treatment of black Americans, and how they're not necessarily showcased to the wider world, even though we see some issues get brought to light that maybe look at other people in America that aren't as affected. There's also some of the strong singles on this album, Check Yourself and It Was a Good Day, which both stand up really well to this day, particularly the Message remix of Check Yourself, which of course brings in the beat from the classic Grandmaster Flash The Message, which helps carry along very well. It Was a Good Day, which was always one of Ice Cube's stronger tracks, and showing a more positive side to him than the general aggressive side that we've gotten quite used to at this time. So it's nice to have that diversity showcased on there. Again, a lot of the content and material on this album had been explored before on his previous albums, but it's still he's still very strong with his convictions. DJ Muggs of Cypress Hill helps with the production on several of these tracks, which gives it a bit more of a Cypress Hill kind of feel, which makes it a bit more, gives it a bit of a range from his previous albums. But again, in terms of content, a lot of the stuff had already been explored, so for that is kind of why it comes down slightly. It just kind of feels like going over the same stuff over and over again. So, number 4, America's Most Wanted. Debut album. Content is basically the same as a lot of these other early 90s albums. So this is right at the beginning of 1990, just split from NWA. Looking at a lot of the similar topics as NWA, but bringing a lot of force to them, collaborating with Public Enemy's production team, the Bomb Squad, gave it more of a Public Enemy style than an NWA style, which helps kind of break him away even more and showcase him more as a different artist. that wasn't just the NWA rapper. So it doesn't have as much of a West Coast feel necessarily as some of his other albums do, but it's still Bomb Squad production. It's still very strong, heavy hitting production for the main part. There is content that doesn't necessarily hit quite as well, like only here for one thing, get off my dick and tell your bitch to come here. It's kind of made up for It's a Man's World, which features Yo-Yo and sort of looks at the two of them having a back and forth gender arguments, which is supposed to kind of help balance it out a little bit, but still makes some of the older tracks a bit uncomfortable. There's bonus tracks with the addition of the Kill at Will EP, which is added on this version of the album, which features some remixes of tracks that are already on the album, as well as looking songs like Jackin' for Beats, which features Ice Cube going over a number of different hip-hop tracks from that time, such as EPMD, LL Cool J and others. Dead Homies, which is kind of the first real showing of Ice Cube as a reflective artist, looking at close friends who have passed away due to violence. We also have when the earlier tracks on the album, the Fella You Love to Hate, America's Most Wanted, some the stronger tracks, bringing the album to a really banging start. Turn Off the Radio, Once Upon a Time in the Projects, and Gangsta's Fairy Tale as well. It's a lot of very stronger tracks towards the beginning of the album, which feature Ice Cube looking at things like looking at fairy tales and fairy tale characters in a hood context in quite a clever way to showcase Ice Cube's writing skills, as being able to develop a variety of different styles, looking at his wordplay. I say some of the other tracks which aren't quite as comfortable to listen to drag the album down notably, but as a whole it's still as a piece for Ice Cube as a debut artist, as a new voice in hip-hop, as an expressive voice in hip-hop and Black America at that time. Most of it holds up well. So number 3, we go 2008, Raw Footage. Again, a political album for the most part. The first kind of major political album that Ice Cube had released in quite a while at this point. And again, a lot of the content does look at things that had been explored before in terms of looking at hip hop and in particular gangster rap and the government and the greater world's viewing of it, and where we are perhaps looking down on the genre, and Ice Cube was standing up for it. On tracks like the opening, towards the beginning, we have the tracks Gangster Rap Made Me Do It, where he looks at different things wrong with society that may be worse than what gangster rap often gets blamed for. Similarly, with an intro later to the track Thank God, where he discusses how there are other issues around the world that have nothing to do with gangster rap, but gangster rap gets the blame, that gets the rap for it. Thank God is one of the very strong bangers of the album. Some clever lyrics on there as well, going back earlier and just all the tracks are on the album now. It Takes a Nation, which again has some banging beat, strong wordplay, a chorus which maybe a bit tricky to take on face value, but when you think of it on the context of hip hop and the way that black people can be seen, not just by white America but other black people, looking at people within the community who may be bringing the whole community down as well. It's an interesting discussion which has been brought up by Ice Cube before, which we'll get onto soon. Why Me, which again looks at people dying from gang violence, with a beautiful Music Soul Child chorus. The Game appears later on the album with WC as kind of a new West Side connection, as it were, after the kind of falling out between Ice Cube and Mac 10. And towards the end of the album as well, we just get a lot of strong strong content tracks, like Got Money, Spend Money, No Money, looking at the idea of having spending too much money, not be able to spend money wisely. Tomorrow, Stand Tall, Take Me Away are all quite strong tracks to end the album off with. There are some towards the middle of the album which don't necessarily add too much to the album. The intro song, I Got My Lokes On with Young Jeezy, is fine, but in the context of the rest of the album, kind of feels a little bit out of place. So that's kind of why the album drops slightly. But in terms of a strong statement album, it was certainly one of the stronger ones we got from Ice Cube, particularly at that time. So that's why I feel it needs to be ranked as high as it is. Number 2, going to the end of 1998 for War and Peace Volume 1, the War disc. Now this, again, looking at the difference between the commercial Ice Cube and the more political and reflective Ice Cube, this certainly it's certainly the darkest album. I think it kind of brings in some of the more apocalyptic nature that we were getting from like Busta Rhymes at this kind of time. That's necessarily a deliberate influence or just coincidental, but in tracks like War and Peace, there's on the title track, there's certainly a very apocalyptic feel to it, as being the end of the world, lean on to then Ice Cube being shot, and going on to the track Ghetto Vet, featuring the story of a gangbanger in the streets who suffers a debilitating injury and becomes a gangbanger in a wheelchair, which is in both equal parts amusing and upsetting. So be able to bring a song like that onto the album. It's one of Ice Cube's strongest storytelling tracks, I feel. We get some more looks at money and greedy corporations. Tracks like Cash Over Ass and The Curse of Money. Limos, Demos and Bimbos, again looking at the record industry. Sequel to Once Upon a Time in the Projects from his debut album. Again, towards the beginning of the album, we get some really strong, banging and dark songs from Ask About Me and Pushing Weight, which are both very strong, banging opening tracks, and Dr. Frankenstein and Fuck Dying with Korn, which are very dark tracks, but at the same time life affirming tracks, and showing both sides of the coin of Ice Cube. Even though you may be in a very dark place, that life still is, worth a lot. So in total, a different style from Ice Cube, in the sense of like being very dark in comparison to a lot of his other albums. Not quite as overtly political as some of his other stuff, but still, all the production is very strong on here. Very different to a lot of his other styles, a lot of his other albums. So that's why it feels like a standout album to me. So number one, we go end of 1991, Death Certificate. So this kind of took the formula that he was developing on America's Most Wanted and just takes it up substantially. There are still uncomfortable moments on the album, but everything feels on there for a reason. The idea of having the death side to the album and the life side of the album gives Ice Cube a lot to play with, in terms of having more of a negative critique of society for the first half of the album, and then for the second half looking at more of a positive way forward of addressing particular issues. So standout track, Us, looking at the black community and ways that people within the community may be holding down the rest of the community, and ways to try and bring themselves up more at a time where, of course, early 90s America, black Americans, just before the Rodney King debacle, still not in a great place, and very well may never be, but where hopefully we're going to, I won't get too sidetracked now, but hopefully we in recent years we're going to start getting into a more positive light anyway. But back to 1991, looking at Colorblind, which looks at the whole Bloods and Crips, and how the people shouldn't be gangbangers shouldn't be attacking each other. The bonus track, How to Survive in South Central, a nice sort of look at the sort of half comedic, half satirical look at people visiting the hoods of Los Angeles, California. Other strong tracks early on in the album, A Bird in the Hand, which looks at having to resort to drug dealing to support oneself. Alive on Arrival, which is another satirical look at someone who is dying from gang violence but tries to get help in the hospital to no avail, leading into the death interlude and then the birth interlude, which helps mesh the two sides of the album together. I say, a lot of the tracks on the album have like kind of answers to each other in the kind of themes of them. Like, My Summer Vacation is kind of answered by Colorblind later on the second half. The Wrong Fella to F with is, I could say fuck, I'm not getting paid for this. But starts off the album really, really strong. And there are, moments again. So Black Career, which at the time, so as a look at Koreans in Los Angeles, the shops owned by Koreans rather than black people. Maybe a bit difficult to stomach in this age still, but again, you can kind of see the reason for it being on there. It's trying to have a discussion about those race relations at that time. And No Vaseline as well, which of course the infamous diss song to NWA, which there'd been no NWA disses on the first album, but this one brought it on from following NWA's lines towards Ice Cube. And yeah, Ice Cube certainly doesn't go in on this song, and it was certainly controversial at the time. There's certainly bits in it which are still fairly controversial to this day in the aspect of a confrontational diss track. It kind of all works well, and it can be kind of defended in that aspect. And it's a kind of nice way, in a sense, apart from the bonus track, to close the album off, I suppose. I mean, Us might have been a better selection for a closer, but I guess we did need the closure of the breakaway from NWA and how they responded to Ice Cube breaking away. So there's that. Also, obviously, the album as a whole has more of the West Coast feel to it. The Bomb Squad don't appear in the production. Instead, we get Sir Jinx, a Lench Mob as production for the album. Ice Cube himself helping out with production as well, to give it more of the West Coast feel that was perhaps missing from his debut. So as a full West Coast project, this is cohesive. It all flows really well together. Everything on there has a purpose for being on there. If they may not all necessarily be politically correct today, they all have their moments, and everything has every subject that's addressed on the album kind of has its moment to shine. So, and as I say, we had the 25th anniversary recently, which had Good Cop, Bad Cop, and a couple of other bonus tracks on as well, which helped bolster the album even more from that sense. But still, very strong album. One of my favourites overall albums in terms of hip hop. The whole structure of the album I still love to this day, and yeah, that's why I feel it is the strongest Ice Cube album. I will see you again at some point soon, I suppose.